Good evening and welcome to this JCT English webinar using poetry as a stimulus for the classroom-based assessments. This is a webinar designed to support teachers in their implementation of the Junior Cycle English specification. We are aware that teachers may be joining the webinar on either a desktop or a mobile tablet device, and a key aspect of tonight's event is getting involved using the question function, which you can see here on screen. I'll pose a number of questions tonight and ask you to use this question button to submit your comments and responses. If watching the recording of this webinar, you can add your responses using Twitter via our hashtag JCEnglish. Resources that are used tonight are available from jct.ie. Tonight we have a handout, which you should be able to see on screen near your question button, which contains some of the transcripts for some of our audio resources and some other useful resources we've created. You can avail of the handout now by clicking the handouts button on both the desktop and mobile tablet. And they are available on the English page at jct.ie in the CPD workshop section by clicking on the elective workshops menu. So, our learning intentions for this evening's webinar are to explore the use of poetry to support language development throughout the Junior Cycle learning journey, and to deepen our understanding of the oral communication classroom-based assessment and the collection of the students' texts classroom-based assessment. When focusing on texts to support language development throughout the Junior Cycle learning journey, planning and selection of teaching approaches need to be guided by the principle that the text is a vehicle for teaching learning outcomes. It is also worth noting that texts can be taught in varying levels of depth, depending on the aspects of the learning outcome being targeted by the teacher for that particular lesson or series of lessons. Remembering that across the Junior Cycle learning journey, care will be needed to find a balance between choosing a sufficiently broad range of texts and providing learners with a variety of language experiences and opportunities to develop the range of skills envisioned in the learning outcomes. As the specification states, a course will be created to include many opportunities for students to create their own texts in response to those studied and as part of their general language and literacy development. While we can use any text to support the teaching of learning outcomes, tonight we will look specifically at the use of poetry and how it can be used as a stimulus to engage with the knowledge, understanding, values and skills expressed in the learning outcomes across the 3 years of the Junior Cycle, and for 2 specific moments in the learning journey: the oral communication classroom-based assessment in 2nd year and the collection of the students' texts classroom-based assessment in 3rd year. There are, of course, a number of guidelines that we need to adhere to when planning for teaching, learning and assessment of Junior Cycle English. In 1st year, a student should have the opportunity to engage with a variety of drama extracts, a number of non-literary texts, a number of short stories, a study of a novel with ongoing sustained reading of novels throughout the year, and have the chance to engage with a minimum of 10 poems. There is a suggested list, an indicative list, available on curriculumonline.ie. In 2nd and 3rd year, there are a number of content requirements that have prescribed conditions, and you will find these in the Junior Cycle English text list, also available on curriculumonline.ie. When planning, teachers need to bear in mind that students should have the opportunity to engage with a number of non-literary texts, 2 novels taken from the prescribed list, 2 drama texts, a number of short stories, and to engage with a minimum of 16 poems over the course of 2nd and 3rd year. Across the webinar tonight, you will see this blue question mark icon appearing on screen, which will give us time to stop, reflect, check in, and share with each other. Each time you see this blue question mark icon, we will ask you a question and you will have the option to share your insights. Your responses will be shared during the webinar, and if watching the recording, again, you can use the hashtag JCEnglish. As you can see on screen, if you click the question function, you will have access to ask us questions. Bearing in mind the guidelines on using poetry as a text over the 3 years of Junior Cycle English, we would like to hear your responses to the following questions now. What poems and/or genres of poetry do you like to use in class with your Junior Cycle students? So please use the question mark icon and submit your responses, and we will come back to those later in the webinar. So over the course of 3 years, we use a broad range of texts, like poetry, as a vehicle to engage with the learning outcomes. Students are given the opportunity to engage with rich learning experiences across the 3 fully integrated strands of oral language, reading and writing over the course of first, second and third year. Our students encounter a key check-in moment towards the end of second year, the oral communication classroom-based assessment. A focus of tonight's webinar is to explore how poetry can be used as a stimulus for students to develop their language skills in both the oral communication CBA and the collection of student text CBA, which occurs in third year. So let's consider the key details in this slide. The oral communication classroom-based assessment is based on a number of learning outcomes. These are listed on screen or also on page 18 of our specification. The oral communication CBA has 2 priorities: the development of students' basic research skills and the communication. Preparation and assessment is to be done over a maximum of 3 school weeks, which is nationally specified by the NCCA. Dates are available on curriculumonline.ie in the English section. Students can choose from 4 formats: response to a stimulus, interview, performance or presentation. The students can complete this individually or as part of a group. There is a student reflection note to accompany the students' work. It is assessed at a common level using features of quality to award a descriptor, and the assessment is then supported by a subject learning and assessment review meeting. In order to plan for incremental learning, we need to factor in opportunities for students to engage with and demonstrate their learning prior to the CBA moments. Students will have a number of opportunities to engage with these learning outcomes across different units of work throughout junior cycle. The CBA moment provides an opportunity for the student to demonstrate their learning in relation to the specific learning outcomes outlined for CBA 1. In preparing for the oral communication CBA, it is important to familiarise ourselves with the samples of student work that are available on curriculumonline.ie. This site contains annotated examples of student work and some background on how they arose in the classroom. We would also like to take this opportunity to draw your attention to the Early Insights video that was compiled on the oral communication CBA that took place in schools across the country. The video shows how students across a range of schools accessed the classroom-based assessments through the 4 formats suggested for the CBA. Before we begin to explore the use of poetry as a stimulus for the oral communication CBA, again we'll draw your attention to the blue question mark icon and ask you to submit your responses to this particular question. How have your students used poetry to engage with classroom-based assessment 1? So if you've used poetry as a stimulus for CBA 1 through performance, response to a stimulus, etc., just click on the icon and we'd love to hear your testimony, and we will share these responses later. There are lots of ways in which we can use poetry as a stimulus for the 4 formats in the oral communication CBA. Our English team considered how we might use this stimulus, High School Training Ground by Malcolm London. If you go to your handout section of the tab, you will see a script for this audiovisual piece that you can download and use as a resource in class for further exploration. So let's take a few minutes to watch the audiovisual before we share our suggestions.
We talk a lot about telling stories, and I think that is very important. But I think now our job as poets is not only to tell the story, but to change it. To start changing the stories we tell and the ones we hear. My name is Malcolm London. I'm representing Youth Media Chicago, Power to the People. The title of this poem is High School Training Ground. At 7:45 a.m., I open the doors to a building dedicated to building, yet only breaks me down. I march down hallways, cleaned up after me every day by regular janitors, but I never have the decency to honor their names. Lockers left open like teenage boys' mouths when girls wear clothes that covers their insecurities. but exposes everything else. Masculinity mimicked by men who grew up with no fathers, camouflage, worn by bullies who are dangerously armed but need hugs. Classrooms overpacked like book bags. Teachers pay less than what it costs them to be here. Oceans of adolescents come here to receive lessons but never learn to swim. Part like the Red Sea when the bell rings. This is a training ground. My high school is Chicago, diverse and segregated on purpose. Social lines are barbed wire. Hierarchy burned into our separated classrooms, free to sit anywhere but reduced to divided lunch tables. Labels like regular and honors resonate. This is a training ground. Education misinforms. We are uniformed, trained to capitalize letters at a young age, taught now that capitalism raises you, but you have to step on someone else to get there. This is a training ground. Sought to sort out the regulars from the honors, a recurring cycle built to recycle the trash of this system. Am in honors classes, but go home with regular students who are soldiers in a war zone in territory they don't really own. When did lives become expendable? CBS is a training ground, concentration on professional suits. CBS is a training ground centered on personal success. CBS is a training ground. One generation is taught to lead, the other is made to follow. No wonder so many of my people spit bars because the truth is hard to swallow. See, the need for degrees has left so many of my people frozen. See, the need for degrees has left so many of my people frozen. The educated aren't necessarily the educated. I have a 1.9 GPA. Got drunk before my ACT and still received the 25. Now tell me how I'm supposed to act. Homework is stressful, but when you go home every day and your home is work, you don't want to pick up any assignments. Reading textbooks is stressful, but reading doesn't matter when you feel your story is already written, either dead or getting booked. Taking tests is stressful, but bubbling in a Scantron doesn't stop bullets from bursting. Our direction hasn't changed. When our Board of Education is driven by lawyers and businessmen, only one teacher sits on that board. Now, what does that teach you? I hear the education systems are failing, but I believe they are succeeding in what they're built to do, to train you, to keep you on track, to track down an American dream that has failed so many of us all. Thank you.
So we've provided the link for this audiovisual piece on the handout also, and apologise if the playback is a little bit glitchy just when playing it through the webinar. So before we share our suggestions, we would like to remind you that the root of our suggestions is in the specific learning outcomes that the Oral Communication CBA is based upon. And when exploring learning outcomes across a unit of work and over the course of the broader learning journey, it is important that we engage our students with the critical features of the different communication formats. So these are the suggestions that the English team, JCT, came up with for using this performance poem as a stimulus for the Oral CBA. Students might interview the poet, or might interview a member of the audience. For response to a stimulus, students might give a speech based around a personal response around the school, or a theme or issue that raised in the poem, or perhaps the poem prompted the creation of an artwork piece which the students can use during the Oral Communication CBA. For performance, the students might create and perform their own poem, created in response to London's. They might explore performance poetry, spoken word artists, or perform a sketch or monologue inspired by his poem. For presentation, students might do a presentation on one of the following topics: education, their own school, or indeed their ideal school. So let's take a look at another piece of performance poetry, Grange Gorman by Hazel Hogan. Keep your responses coming in using the question mark and the blue icon. And for this particular moment, we'd like you to think about how might your students respond to this for CBA 1? Or how could you use this poem to inspire students to use it as a stimulus for one of the 4 formats in the Oral Communication CBA? So take a few moments to offer your insights, and we will share some of the wider responses next. But first of all, we're just going to watch Grange Gorman. And again, we have provided the direct link to this in the handout.
I saw the tired faces of friends, indignant, dissident, determined, lit up bright by the helicopter lights that hovered above us in the night, rudely awakened by the noise of grinding machinery powered by Garda uniform and private security, encroaching on our vicinity. Intimidation, violence, and hostility was their only method of tyranny. They erected fences and chains that separated people temporarily. They thought of us as lesser because of their self-assumed disparity. It was their lack of morality that allowed them to act so horribly, their choices fueled by apathy. Evicting people from their homes becomes the new reality, when for every one homeless person, 73 homes lie empty. This is modern day Ireland. Have we forgotten that only 100 years ago, Plunkett and Pearse gave their lives so we could be free? Parnell, who stands stone on his pillar, built on the foundations of the land league, would crumble to dust if he knew landlords still take homes with ease. The dissonance of the past, a history of verse rings true and feels the dissonance of today. Poets and people's voices fiery with rage, trying to propagate ideas, acting as a catalyst for change. On this hour of eviction, 4 IF vans stood on either side of the street, ready to release their batons that could beat and their pepper spray that could sting, wanting us to fall to our feet. We stood tall, backs held straight with conviction. This inner city crowd could resist this dereliction. If only the governments and corporations could gain some clarity, their blind eyes would see that you can only find unity when you strive for peaceful community. The guards could never imprison this idea that homes and lives should be free. If there's one thing you take from these words, it's this. People from our history proved it's okay to disobey. It's possible to pave another way. Let not our bricks rot and our buildings lie vacant. Our collective spirit cannot fade away. Unlock it without the key. It's time to take it back. Take back your city.
So just some of the responses that we've received in relation to the questions that we've posed earlier in the webinar. In response to particular poems and genres of poems, many people have shared themes and genres that will be familiar to a lot of us, maybe like war, love, nature and friendship. Teachers have shared with us their experiences surrounding contemporary poetry and life experiences as other avenues when approaching poetry. For a question, how have your students used poetry for CBA 1? For performance, some students have composed and performed their own poems. In relation to interviews, students have taken on the persona of the poet and discussed their reasons for writing the poem and placing particular emphasis on word choices. And we can see here then the alignment between the assessment and the learning outcomes. For response to a stimulus, the students have given their own reflections and responses to particular poems. And for presentation, some students have researched particular poets, including local poets, and introduced their classmates to the life and times of these particular poets and also some of their most famous works. Moving on to the next question as responses come in relation to how might we use the text Grange Gorman as a stimulus for CBA 1. Teachers have guided students to focus on particular lines from the poem and use these as a stimulus for discussions. So focusing on modern day Ireland, we may ask our students to consider their view of Ireland as a 21st century place to live and conduct research and illustrate their responses through the presentation format. Stemming from the line, poets and people's voices fiery with rage. We could ask students to conduct research into the work of the poet and how they contributed to communicating important messages. Hazel speaks about the need to find a catalyst for change. Students might use these to propel them to think about things that they feel particularly passionate about, that they feel need to change, and compile research on the topic then to support their communication in this response. Further to some of the poems that you've shared tonight, our team have compiled a list of suggested poems that can be used with your students in class. Again, this list is not exhaustive, but could be used to broaden your approach to teaching poetry over the course of the 3 years. Some of the responses we've received in from teachers have been An Irish Airman Foresees Death by William Butler Yeats, Wilfred Owen's Dulce et Decorum Est, The Thickness of Ice by Liz Lockhead, Digging Seamus Heaney, If by Rudyard Kipling, Missing You by Jimmy McCarthy, Midterm Break, Seamus Heaney, Funeral Blues, W.H. Auden, and others. Again, please continue to keep providing your insights. We'll refer back to them later, and also using our hashtag JCEnglish on Twitter. It's a great opportunity to share the poems that we have used. So as we move into the 3rd year of the learning journey, students continue to engage even further with the 39 learning outcomes, building incrementally towards the end of the year. Poetry can continue to be used as a stimulus to help students prepare for another key check-in moment in their learning journey, the collection of students' texts CBA. This key check-in moment starts at the beginning of 2nd year and finishes towards the end of term 1 in 3rd year. So let's consider some of the key details for the collection of student text CBA. It's based on a number of learning outcomes. These are also detailed on page 18 of our specification. The focus is on students developing as creators of text. They build a collection between the start of 2nd year and term 1 of 3rd year. It will arise from classwork in the majority of cases, through scaffolding and supportive feedback from teachers as students develop and grow as writers. Students should complete at least 4 pieces in 4 different genres. Pieces in the collection are accompanied by 1 previous draft and a reflection note. Students submit the 2 best texts from their collection for assessment by their teacher. These are assessed at a common level using the features of quality to award each a descriptor. Teachers' judgments will be supported through a SLAR meeting. Like the previous oral communication CBA, it's important to be cognizant of the learning outcomes associated with the collection of students' texts CBA prior to the check-in moment. This enables us to inform our planning and allows us to create learning experiences whereby students engage with and are afforded the opportunity to demonstrate aspects of the learning in these learning outcomes over a period of time. As this CBA calls for a focus on the writing process, we need to allow time for feedback and scaffolding throughout the building of the collection over the course of 2nd and 3rd year. Similar to the oral CBA, it is important that we familiarise ourselves with the examples of student work for the collection of student texts on curriculumonline.ie in the English section, which is detailed here in the screen grab. This site is regularly updated and offers authentic, annotated, assessed examples of written work using the features of quality. Each example also gives some background on how the text originated from the classroom context, and they've been gathered from a number of teachers nationwide. During tonight's webinar, we are focusing on poetry as a stimulus for the CBAs. Bearing that in mind, again, we'd love to hear about poetry and writing in your classes. So you will see the blue question mark icon again. And the question that we'd like you to respond to here is, how have you used poetry as a stimulus for the collection of student texts CBA? So how have your students engaged with poetry for CBA 2? The focus of the CBA is the creation of written pieces in a variety of genres, bearing in mind that there is no exhaustive list, but that the students' collection should be a varied one. Let's consider how You Think I Wear This For You might act as a stimulus for engaging with these suggested genres. We considered how You Think I Wear This For You might act as a stimulus for engaging with these suggested genres. So let's take a moment to listen to this audio. You will see on the handout section that you can avail of the text for this audio visual should you wish again to use it as a resource in your own classes. We will then share some of the English team's consideration on how you might use this as a stimulus. So let's watch the piece now.
think I wear this for you? As if Islam means submission to your man-made conditions. Don't include us in this game, where labels replace names, where less means more and more means we can't think for ourselves. Whoever said that potential was confined to a cloth on your head, this is only half of what I represent. Let me show you the other that's not so apparent. Hear my words, exchange my thoughts, uncover what's been revealed through a cloth. Identify me by my headscarf. I am a Muslim woman, so listen to me speak. Don't paint me as a picture worth 1,000 words. I have so much more to say and do and contribute, so let me choose what to show you. You think I wear this for you? As if the scarf equals religious, apparent modesty, sacrilegious? No. It is so much more than what it seems. Inner character and good deeds. Kind to parents, kind to neighbors, give in charity from your labor. No one ever became poor by giving. You think I wear this for you? As if I don't notice how I'm not part of current trends, coming up with new ways for us to overspend. Don't exploit the reasons for our representation. Since when did hijab change from that to presentation? You think I wear this for you? A commandment in my religion I choose to listen and follow, to please the one that elevated women above others. Heaven lies beneath our feet. Children commanded to be gentle with us in speech. Love your mother, then your mother, then your mother, then your father. Can't you see how beautiful we women are honored? Do you really think I wear this for you?
So, some of the suggested genres: functional writing piece, opinion piece, biographical or descriptive pieces, narrative or critical analysis or critique of the piece. Again, when exploring critical features, it's important to understand that the root of these suggestions is in the specific learning outcomes that the collection of the student's text CBA is based upon. When exploring learning outcomes across a unit of work and over the course of the broader learning journey, it is important that we engage our students with the critical features of different genres of writing. So we considered how we might use "You think I wear this for you." But again, it's important to remember that these are just some suggestions. This is only half of what I represent. Let me show you the other that's not so apparent. Write a personal response to these lines. What lies beyond appearance? Write a blog piece entitled "No One Ever Became Poor by Giving," persuading your audience to be charitable. Another suggestion: listen to me. Write a speech in which you argue the importance of freedom of speech. Or write a short story entitled "Where Labels Replace Names." Again, just some suggestions. Look forward to hearing others as we progress. So let's see what your insights might be and what suggestions you would like to share in how might your students respond to this particular poem. This is her first publication by Conor O'Callaghan for Classroom-Based Assessment 2. Conor's an Irish poet whose work can be found on poetryfoundation.org. And again, if you'd like to use this poem, you can avail of the text in the handouts available within this webinar. So I'm going to read this poem and ask you to input your responses as to how might your students respond to this for CBA 2. This is her first publication by Conor O'Callaghan. He's already opened it and left it on the table at her name. It's been so long she'd almost forgotten to expect it. It's 7-ish, warm, and the shower upstairs is thrumming. She jumps to the biogs at the back and reads aloud the sentence of hers she didn't write, on the off chance that its sense might prove a little slice of history. She tries her folks. Her mother's stab at excitement makes her blush. Her dad will be thrilled to bits and told to ring the minute he's back from the links. They cook with only the kitchen's strip lights glowing and have fun imagining all the people who'll see it. He says the others seem very samey. Hers stands out. He says he remembers the cliff-top walk it's about. He remembers the ocean, the moored yachts, the bubbles blown by kids across their path like it was yesterday. He talks as though the you in the second last line were simply him. She changes into her sweatpants, her mules, and chooses not to wreck the evening explaining. The phone goes as they're serving. They let it cut out onto the answering machine. Tomorrow she'll find her dad asking about copies for his sister, her cousins, in Connecticut. Then the lapse between dinner and bed, spent in a daze, her head gone light, the ends of her fingers buzzing. Even her words on the handful of pages she has looks strange. It's like a feeling of having run through glass and emerged the other side in a clearing, or being stopped at a level crossing when there's no sign of any train. They toast the occasion with cider from champagne flutes, sprawl on the patio, split a bag of pre-salted pretzels, and watch tonight come out all over in planets. This is her first publication. She's wrapped in it. It's life happening without her, which she'll catch up with. Inside, the TV is chirping the long-range forecast on Sky. If this were the city, she tells herself, there'd be sirens, the dark turning up its volume. Instead, there's the silence they sit in a way that makes sitting feel like waiting. So some of the responses that have been coming in to us in relation to how students have been using poetry for classroom-based assessment. Students have adapted the persona of a poet to write a memoir or a diary entry. They've explored setting or world of a poem through a travel blog, a travel brochure, introducing the setting through a descriptive piece. They've written opinion pieces about a topic that a poet has discussed. Inspired by poems like Clearances 3 from Seamus Heaney, they've written a memoir about childhood experience that stands out in their mind and has an impact on them as they grew up. Also, another suggestions come in about students writing a personal essay inspired by an image in a poem that they've studied. They've imagined they've been characters in poems, writing emails to the poets in response to their thoughts and views. And just some responses that have come into us now in relation to the last question that we've asked you as to what might your students do with this particular poem. This is her first publication. Students may write a personal piece about their own experience of writing a text, of creating their first draft of writing. He talks as though the you in the second last line were simply him. So by taking those lines from the poem, that students have been encouraged to write an opinion piece on the impact that the relationships could have on people as they sail through their everyday lives. Other suggestions, students could write a short story that is charged with atmosphere, inspired by this poem. Or another suggestion coming in here is to write a dialogue that you imagine occurred between the speaker in the poem and her dad, you know, when they are celebrating this publication. So again, we've included here some further poems and poets that our team thought might be particularly useful to use as a stimulus for prompting the writing process for the collection of students' texts. List is not exhaustive, as we said already, but can be used as part of a balanced approach to planning for broad learning experiences for students over the 3 years of the learning journey. So further suggestions of poems that have been coming in across the evening have been Timothy Winters by Charles Causley, When You Were Old by William Butler Yeats, Poem for Lara, 10, Michael Hartnett, Zombie by the Cranberries, Hope Is a Thing with Feather, Emily Dickinson, Changes by Tupac, The Road Not Taken, Seamus Heaney, sorry, The Road Not Taken, Robert Frost, my apologies, Blackberry Picking by Seamus Heaney, Spancil Hill, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. So again, you can continue to share your suggestions using Twitter and our hashtag JCEnglish. So when considering a balanced approach across junior cycle English using the learning outcomes, planned for use of a broad range of texts and a variety of language experiences and opportunities for students. So with that in mind, we would love to hear your final thoughts on how you've already used or intend to use poetry as a stimulus for learning across the wider learning journey. So feel free to share your experiences using Twitter and our hashtag JC English, as I've mentioned, and this is an opportunity to keep the conversation going after tonight and opportunities to share resources with each other. If you would like further supports on using poetry as a stimulus in your classroom, further supports are available through poetryarchive.org, dublincityofliterature.ie, poetryireland.ie, Curriculum Online, as mentioned earlier, poetryfoundation.org, salmonpoetry.com have some lovely audio resources on their website, and also our own website, jct.ie. So just to recap for our hopes, for our learning intentions for this particular webinar, we considered the use of poetry to support language development throughout the junior cycle learning journey, and we considered the role of poetry within the oral communication CBA and the collection of the students' text CBA. We hope that you found the webinar useful and supportive. Finally, the English team would like to thank all participants for taking the time to take part in tonight's webinar, and we'd like to remind you that the webinar and resources will be available in coming days in the English section of jct.ie, and if you have any further questions or queries, you can always email us at info@jct.ie. Thank you again, and good night from us all.